This is a network that consists of a wide variety of people who are all working or doing research in the city of Amsterdam or its surroundings. The network is being organized by Ying Tzu, by Otto, by Deirdre, and by Sophia. My name is Jonas Willems. I'm an assistant professor, amongst others, in the Future Planet Studies Bachelor, in which I teach several food-related courses, food planning courses. So I'm moderating today. We have two presentations. We have a presentation by Sophia and her citizen initiative, Taste Before You Waste. And before that, we will have a presentation by Ying Tzu and by Peter, who will present their new research that they've started on food waste as part of the University of Amsterdam's Center for Urban Studies. Before we start, could you please briefly put on your camera if you not have yet, because I'm curious who is in the room today, who we have here. So who is, for example, who's working for a government? If you are, you can wave in front of the camera. Okay, thanks. Hi, Erik. Who is a student who is studying food planning or food-related elements? Carmen, hi. Hello. Who's a researcher? Okay, that's about half of the people. Who's working for a citizen initiative or a community initiative or an NGO? Sort of. And who is working for the private sector? Okay, hi Zed. Did I miss any groups? Did I not mention anybody? No? Oh, Welmoed, yeah. Which category would you fit your?
I don't know. Socially involved citizen.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Welcome as well. All right, we will have two presentations, as I said. They will take about half of the meeting, so that they will last until, I think, 4:45, 10 to 5, and then we'll have a general discussion afterwards on the topic of food waste, which is central to today's discussion. I won't use much more time. I think I will hand over the floor to Peter and to Ying Tzu and their presentation on food waste. So floor is yours. Ying Tzu, you are muted still, so we cannot hear you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, my name is Ying Tzu Lin. I'm the PhD at the Urban Planning Department at UVA. And together with Peter, who is from the Historical Department, we will co-host the presentation today. It's called #Wasted, the Urban Economy of Food Waste. And this is below, there are other members of our team. Leticia, she's here, if she could wave at us. She's a geographer, and we also have other geographers and historians being the team study food waste in Amsterdam together. Okay. So how do we start? We are a team, as we know, we're a team of urban geographers and historians. Our discussion started with in a very informal discussion on space, resource, and value. So as we all know that Amsterdam is getting more and more gentrified, the counterculture, the space that cornered by the counterculture also has been disappearing. And then as space is getting more and more become a commodity, we're trying to brainstorm what is the opposite of it? How could we decommodify the urban space? How could we find alternative value of the space? Then we thought food waste is a very good lens to examine the decommodification and recommodification of space, resource, and values it created. And for example, it will be nice to see how food waste are transformed from waste to resource, and in what places in the city is this transformation of value happens, and then in what places they reuse this value. Then we could, I think, just by taking a literature point of view, mapping where are the resource, where are the values transformation go, and we dig into field research, it will be a fruitful outcome of something. So that was our plan initially in 2019. And at the end of 2019, we roughly mapped what is going on in the city, and it was planned to do a field research on 2020, but as you all know, Corona happened. So everyone is sort of wasted at home, sort of HORECA, so it doesn't make that much sense to do field research. But today we are still going to propose our proposal and our sharpened views after this whole Corona things happen. So, so why waste? Like, why do we study waste? As we learn from the literature since 1970s, waste has been redefined as a resource. So reuse the waste to reinvent the value as a resource. And there could be many things. There could be energy, there could be textile, there could be water, all the other materialities. But food, it seems, come to the last meter of the how can we reuse waste food as resource. And then along with recently urban circular economy also has been proposed. So food waste is also a very good lens to study opportunities, challenges of the production of urban circularity. So waste, or as known as food surplus, according to some of practitioners in the field, they say if you present food waste to people, say like, hey, like this is the food waste, it's for free, it's for salad, and people was like, well, like waste. But if you say like a food surplus, people say, oh, food surplus, yeah, I can take it. Like there's a very subtle difference in food waste and surplus, not only by what it means, but also how people react. It reflects on there's a very thin line between food and waste. So if we took my research site street market as an example, 3.30, like strawberries are still food. So it's like, okay, like €1 per pack. Then 3.50 became like 50 cents per pack. 4 o'clock, the vendor decided to got off. It became waste. It's for free on the street. So there's a very thin line between like waste and commodity, resource and surplus. And then if we roughly categorize how do current stakeholders use the surplus, we could see there recommodification of the surplus and decommodification of the surplus. What is recommodification? For example, the innovation business in stock, which is created under the Ahold company, they collect the food surplus from Albert Heijn and to open a restaurant out of it. So this food is not for free. You still have to pay for it. So we also by consuming the food, you also buy the idea of circularity. But at the same time, like Taste Before You Waste or all the other anarchist group social center, they simply pick up food from the green grocery shop and distribute for free, or do free restaurant to offer people who is needed. So they also create different value of food surplus. So we're very interested to map out the distribution of these places. What is actually happen? What do people do with? And what is the flow and social network circulate around these communities? And what are potential that we could corner more, like decommodify urban space in the city? So we we roughly map out all these places and different types. So for example, if we talk about recommodification, there's in stock. There's a very famous app called Too Good To Go. I think many of you know it. They grab the last minute when the food is going to become surplus to sell it in a very good price. There's also decommodification with more social enterprise or sustainable purpose, like taste before you waste. Sophia will talk later. Costco launch, they also pick up food surplus from the market and pickle them with the community. Anarchist group like Guerrilla Kitchen, Free Supermarket, they simply don't want to waste the food. And there are so many people in the city who actually need this free food. So they do it out of these autonomous spirit. And of course, institutionalized, there's philanthropy organization like food banks. So according from our research and the very important source from the social enterprise food circle, like we kind of map out there's recommodification part. So it's either on site, so like in stock, or some organizations selling a banana, like selling banana bread used by waste banana in the supermarket. But there's also plenty of e-platforms, which of course building e-platforms takes money to redistribute, taking the redistribute of the surplus as a business model. And at the same time, there is a social enterprise oriented to revalue the food surplus, or simply just to give it to people who need. But what happened with what are our new observations during the Corona crisis? I think Peter will explain this onwards.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for having us here, of course, and having an opportunity to talk about this, which for us is also a good way to get back to the project in a way, and you to certainly took the lead in that. So most of the credits go to her, but let's talk about how the Corona crisis impacts both the project and also what new insights it can generate. And that is something that we'd also like to discuss with you as people who are in one way or other involved with this topic, and maybe I could share some of your insights later on. So first of all, what we discussing what we see happening during the Corona crisis, this very strange paradox where on the one hand we see people who become more dependent on philanthropy, on the food banks, for example. So a lot more people who actually really experience a kind of scarcity and are searching for ways to get by food. And at the same time, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, we see an increasing consumption of luxury foods and people ordering good food from restaurants that is usually not available at home. So we really see actually quite a fundamental question about what a crisis and what scarcity is right now, because we're talking about a crisis, but in many ways, I think whether we experience this as a crisis or in what way we experience this as a crisis is very different for different groups within the city. What the Corona crisis certainly did do is expose some of the vulnerabilities of the current food system. So we've seen disruptions even in our daily experience in supermarket supply chains. I think it's about a year ago now that if you went to a supermarket anywhere in Amsterdam, some of the products would actually be out of stock, something that probably none of us had really experienced for a very long time, at least not in the Netherlands. We had this example of farms that were actually specialized in producing, for example, mushrooms for the restaurant business, who all of a sudden couldn't get rid of their mushrooms and had to find new ways of actually getting them to consumers, or even turning them into waste, simply because they were specialized only for that specific economic activity. And we saw new initiatives like Boeren voor Buren, where farmers were trying to connect directly to people who needed food for affordable prices, new ways of trying to reestablish or establish connections between producers and consumers that were not there before the crisis. So yeah, and I touched on the last point. So, so that leads us to a couple of new questions. Basically about how producers, farmers, and retailers, but also maybe consumers are actually coping with this crisis, and if the strategies that we're seeing being employed and being developed in the course of the Corona crisis are, to what extent those strategies are new. Which is, of course, a very crucial question for our research project. So is there anything developing out of this crisis in the way that farmers are thinking about offering their produce, in the way that supermarkets are reacting to the vulnerabilities that they've encountered in the last year, and also the consumers in the ways that they have seen, for example, the importance of local stores to their own supply? Are we seeing any signs of a new paradigm, or are we still expecting it? This is very much something I'm hoping to hear from people directly involved with the field right now. Are we expecting this to be kind of a situation where once this is all over, we go back to normal? Or do we see signs of something coming up that will change the paradigm and change the way that we're organizing our food supply chain? And that, of course, would be, for the future of our project, a very pertinent question, also in the way we think about what places to analyze further. So what we're planning to do is after the summer, we want to go back to mapping the resources and the places where the value of food food surplus is recreated. We hope to then really start conducting field research at several of these places, and we would very much welcome collaboration and more context and your insights on the project and on the questions that we just addressed in the course of today, of course, but also if anyone comes up with something later on, we very much like and like to benefit from your insights. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yingtu and Peter. Very interesting or triggering questions, I think, also for the discussions that we can have after the presentation of Sophia. Now I would like to give everybody the opportunity to ask your questions for clarification, for example, or if you have any other questions, share them now. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I have a question, if I may. Yeah, I was wondering, to what extent are you already working with some of the initiatives dealing with food surplus in designing the research, or whether you sort of have them already on board, or how do you go about this? And thanks for the presentation.
We interviewed few people already in the field, and we already got like the first hand of what are the, let's say, what are the main actors in the food waste in Amsterdam. So that's so far we got now, and as we know, like many of them were struggled during the crisis as well. And like, for example, in stock, the restaurant, it's simply closed. So it's actually a huge disruption to the supply chain of either food surplus or even circularity. Or just going a bit far, like so some mushroom farms, they use coffee waste to mix their mushroom, but because of the close of cafe, they simply don't have enough coffee waste, so they had to stop. Like they have like less production. So we really hope things are getting back, like at least a bit in hand, and we could go out to scouting more of our findings.
Thanks, Lucy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, somehow. I mean, I was perhaps also still interested, you know, whether your research would then also target some of the issues these initiatives are facing, or yeah, like whether not only, I mean, it makes sense that you interview them, but whether they also get to shape the research in some way.
I also had a question. If that one.
Yeah, maybe first let's answer this. And I saw
Yeah,
that Erik
well,
raised his hand.
since we haven't really started to touch them, so like it's possible, we keep the possibilities. Yep. And Erik.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, how do you integrate data to make it? Maybe I'm not sure how you are going to present your results, but can you make it smart so that for policymakers like myself, we can use your outcome to make a better policy or to use it in a lobby to emphasize the difference between what is now and what should be. So where do you get the reference from?
Maybe we could also return the question. Maybe what would you need from us in that sense? I mean, it's probably more interesting to have this as a dialogue than saying, well, we were thinking of this. I would really be interested to what would you need to be able to do that?
Well, I'm thinking about, let's say, the food waste. We have a national organization monitoring the food waste in kilos and in percentage, and also where food waste takes place in restaurants or at home or in distribution or in the retail or in the retail chain, so to speak. So it depends on where you focus on, because otherwise it would be it could be your research could be very broad and very wide, and then it depends on what will be the focus, where you can actually come to conclusions, what should be changed or what should be different. So if you look at it now and say that people at households per person waste, let's say, about 50 kilos per year, what should it be, or will you be asking people who you are going to interview about what should you do to reduce it to 10 kilos less or 20 kilos less, or otherwise I'm seeing maybe there's a risk, especially with the retail sector, to look away from the actual targets and just come with nice plans, and we have these ideas and that's it. What does it actually contribute?
Do you want to respond, either Peter or Ying too, or what?
I think I want to, like, as we said, we're not looking at the waste as a whole, but like reusable food surplus, so not cooking waste, but things should still reuse, but people would just simply throw them away, for example. And I think we can learn from many initiatives. For example, for the initiative, they pick up food surplus from the market, and together with like immigrants in the community, they pickle the vegetables in different ways. So I think this is very good examples that it could also be an awareness, but also food knowledge to teach broader audience, hey, if your banana is overdue, you don't have to throw it away. It's actually a very good ingredient for banana bread. Or if you have too much radish, you don't have to throw it away. You could pickle them. I think in this knowledge is like, it's also part of the sustainable knowledge that not only for consumers buy local, but also really use them. So these kind of things are what we're looking for and who are doing it. So I think for policymakers, if you have an overview or if you know who is doing that, that is also a very good strategy to cooperate with them and amplify the impact at the city scale instead of community scale.
Okay, I want to move on to Siska. I think you also had a question.
Yeah, I did have a question. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting project, by the way. I really enjoyed learning about it. And I saw on the chart that you showed of the different kind of categories of food waste and food waste initiatives. On the bottom, there was a section on e-platforms, which you didn't elaborate on. And I was also wondering if perhaps that grew during the Corona crisis, because I think that's also something that came out was also a lot more interaction online. I mean, this meeting is itself also online, not in person. And so maybe thinking about what kind of new changes or new normals come with the corona crisis in terms of food waste, what the potential is there for these kind of online platforms.
Actually, we don't know. We have to look it out. To be honest, we see like we see these platforms still exist, so that's already a good news. They're not closing down, but like how much activities actually happen on these platforms, I think we still have to talk to organizers in person. That will be our next step.
Yeah, I'm curious. It would be very interesting, I think.
Okay, thanks. We have more space for discussion after the presentation by Sophia, and I could see that Dielke, for example, also is mentioning several initiatives that exist in the city of Amsterdam. So that's also something to look at, I would say. But for now, thanks, Peter and Ying too. Let's move on to Sophia and her initiative of Taste Before You Waste. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Let me share my screen. A moment. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Just need to set myself up. All right. But yes, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sophia Bench. I'm a community organizer and food activist. I'm here today as the co-founder of Taste Before You Waste, and I'm also involved currently with the Food Council, MRA, and with ANFP, which we're now all part of. Yes, so I guess my overarching themes that I'm working on are food democracy and food waste. And yeah, now I'd like to continue by introducing Taste Before You Waste. Maybe some of you have already heard of us. But basically what we do is we save perfectly good food from going to waste, and we give it a new life, share it with the community, and try to imbue it with the most value that we possibly can. On a practical note, how do we do this? As you can see on the photo, we go with our carrier cycle and we collect the surplus from local grocery shops in the Javerstraat, sometimes from other from canteens, from farmers, from producers. So wherever we can get our hands on it, basically. And with that food, we organize dinners every Monday and Wednesday, usually. Obviously, this is all pre-COVID, but just to give you an idea of what the initiative was set up to do. Every Monday and Wednesday, we cook with our volunteers and turn these goodies into what we like to see as like the most conscious, affordable, and healthy choice for dinner out. It's all on a pay-as-you-feel basis to make it accessible for everyone, basically. And we try to couple the dinners with discussions, so to use food as the entry point for conversations. So in that vein, we organize a program every Monday with performances, guest speakers. Oh, sorry, I was forgetting to go through the pictures that I wanted to share with you. So as you can see here, we prepare the food, we serve it with our lovely volunteers. And here, that's where we were up to. Our program. And all of these are all our weekly recurring events, and on a less regular basis, we give workshops, lectures like these on the topics of food conservation, sustainable practices, activism, and we also like to work with knowledge institutions such as universities and schools as well, primary schools, secondary schools, and more recently also getting political and trying to cooperate with activist groups and municipalities. And we really see the need to deepen the conversation about this topic, since we feel that the mainstream sustainability rhetoric often leads us to depoliticize the environmentalist discourse. So sometimes by promoting practices as green, without really considering like the social aspects or how they're all like tied towards two systemic injustices, we find that's an oversimplification of the matter, and want to bring in topics like resource destruction, exploitative labor, and social inclusion as well. And ultimately, what we'd like to do by saving and collecting food waste is creating an inclusive social and educational environment where we want to make people aware of the different dimensions of the environmental issues, and yeah, a diverse community that yeah, can strive together towards social and ecological justice. Today, so this is an introduction for Taste Before You Waste. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting the slides, which is also why I decided to do the second part just without share screen. And then at the end, I will get back to the share screen again. So then we can just have a old-fashioned conversation style. Yeah, as we're also partially academic community, and I think there's a lot of scholars here today, I'd like to explore two academic approaches to our work that we find very fitting and relevant to our work, which is the political ecology perspective of food waste and an ethnographic perspective of punk cuisine. So to start with the political ecology approach, which is an article written by Jordi Gascon, and he describes food, or he says what we can all agree on is that food is the loss of perfectly edible food products, and it is a very common phenomenon. A substantial part of all agricultural production is not consumed. But he makes the distinction that the dominant and most widespread paradigm says that that is due to lacking logistics and technology, or poor management of the food on the part of the end user. But from the analysis from a political ecology perspective, it allows for a different interpretation in which the root cause of the problem actually lies in the hegemonic food system, which provides unequal power relationships to different actors. So it's not so much a byproduct in that sense, but ingrained in the system. And to make that point, he describes two different definitions of food waste, one which is already from 1943, which states that food waste is defined as a less than maximum use of nutrients for human consumption, and the second one, which defines food losses as the masses of food lost or wasted in the whole food chain. So the first definition from 1943 includes much more than the one from 2011, a more recent definition, because the unit of calculation in the first one is a unit of energy, and the second one is the unit of mass. So if you calculate in terms of energy, in terms of nutrients, one can also take into account not only the loss of food, but also the loss of resources that are used to produce it. And that's also to say the food that cannot be produced due to the loss of the resources of the agricultural land, for example. So it's a much more broader, all-encompassing definition. Was that the time, Binsu?
No, like sometimes your voice like was lighting away.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. So yeah, so he argues that to break free from this more reductionist outlook that we've more recently adopted, we need to acknowledge that these conventional accounting systems don't necessarily reflect all the processes at play, and that we should avoid to fall into the trap of evaluating what can be measured instead of measuring what needs to be evaluated. So therefore, he argues the root cause of this phenomenon lies not in the logistics and technology factors, nor in the consciousness or education of individuals, but rather in the dominant agro-industrial model and the unequal power relationships within that. And that, which is the main point that I'm trying to make, the problem and the solutions are above all political. And actually, Yingsu, you reminded me that I wanted to make a small point about food surplus versus food waste, because at Taste Before You Waste, we actually resisted this shift towards using food surplus, which we also experienced, that a lot of people around us were maybe 5 or 6 years ago starting to use the term food surplus much more, because it does seem like it's a much more appealing and digestible name, let's say, to say food surplus. But in my view, it doesn't really justify the value of the food itself, but rather the practice of overproducing and wasting it. And in a way, food surplus sounds positive, like an abundance, like it's a good thing that we have too much, rather than a structural miscalculation and power imbalance. And a great shame. So yeah, that was the first, the political ecology approach that really resonates with the work that we do at Taste Before You Waste. And the second article that I wanted to introduce was The Raw and the Rotten. It's Punk Cuisine by Dylan Clark. I'll have the sources on later, and I will now share my screen again. Moment. Yes. So this article is about the ideology of punk cuisine, which is a subcultural.
Can you zoom out your screen a little bit, because we cannot see the full slide completely.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
it comes up differently with me, I think.
Now it
like
works.
this? Okay. So punk cuisine is a subcultural food system which has its own language and symbolism, and it describes the practice of, I guess, this informal, how do you say, eating out environment. And it's also a way of critiquing privileges and social hierarchies within our society. And one way to look at this practice of punk cuisine is through the lens or through the work of Levi Strauss, who says that the process of cooking food differentiates humans from animals and makes it like a quintessential way of how we make culture and civilization. And he made this tripolar gastronomic model that defines raw, cooked, and rotten as the categories as the basic categories to all cuisines. And from his perspective, punks consider industrial food to be very cooked, very produced, and the punks see their food more as raw, which is closer to wild, organic, uncultured, and even enjoy the food that has become rotten, disposed of, or stolen. And punks regularly liken mainstream food geographies to colonialism because of the association to the third world, the destruction of rainforests, the creation of cash cropping, and so on. And yeah, punk food attempts to break free from this fetishization of food as a commodity, and ideally purchases its food in bulk directly from farmers, self-made, homegrown, or otherwise, yeah, less commodified, or in our case, reclaimed. And it even goes so far as to say that you can bathe by bathing corporate food in a dumpster, or by stealing it, or by picking it up at the end of the supply chain. The food is decommodified and kind of returned to its original value as sustenance, as pure use sustenance. Yeah. And one thing that we also came across a lot with Taste Before You Waste is that discarded food is by many people considered to be garbage or disgusting, and that it's only for a certain type of people, such as homeless, and yeah, that's something that we found that really shows the inequalities in society, that if we would offer someone food that looks perfectly appetizing, if we would mention that it was rescued, they would say, no, it's not for me, it's for people who need it. Checking if I've mentioned all my points. So punk cuisine is just a way to critique these power relations, and yeah, one way of remaking yourself outside of these traditional power relations of society, and creating a kind of micro environment of your own, a way to make your ideas knowable, ritualized, and edible, literally, and a way to favor the less mediated foods over the sort of capitalist products. And yeah, to relate back to Taste Before You Waste, we never really saw ourselves as punks or as part of an ideology or subculture, but reading this article years after we started what we do just resonated with us. So maybe we're sort of bringing this punk cuisine to a broader audience, because we're not really in such a extreme niche. So I would say overall, my call to action here is to politicize food more. And I think now more than ever in these COVID times, it's very obvious that that food in a way shows social inequalities. And as Taste Before You Waste, of course, we're also struggling through these times, as our main source of income would always come from donations at the dinner and markets. So if any of you would like to work with us or support us, I've put my email on the screen so we can get in touch.
Thank you, Sophia. Great to hear more about your initiative, and also very interesting to hear how you position your own initiative within those two theoretical frameworks. We have a few minutes time for questions about the initiative itself. Maybe you have other suggestions in regard to literature or approaches to look at the Taste Before You Waste initiative. So if there are any questions, please unmute yourself and ask your question. I have a question myself. It's more related to the initiative itself. I may have missed it in the beginning, but so who is? Are there specific audiences that you are targeting at, to whom you are sharing the products with?
It's basically open for everyone, but of course, by means of how we spread the word, we target certain people. I think at the beginning it was, yeah, we were very popular within a student population, but that's more because of a lot of the, initiators and first volunteers were in a student environment. But we do try to, attract the more broader public now, and always work really within our locality as well to try and engage the neighbors.
Okay, and do you also work together with more conventional channels like the food bank, for example, or maybe social workers to reach out to other groups?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we've been working with Het Wereldhuis, which is a refugee organization, and Regenbooggroep. So especially now in COVID times, actually, when we can't use the food to organize these dinners and so on, we actually donate most of the food that we pick up. We still do our daily pickups, but then donate it directly to organizations working with refugees and homeless people.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I can ask more questions myself, but I'm also curious to hear questions from the audience.
Maybe I can. I think it connects nicely to your question, Jonas, because it's like from seeing this initiative from the broader perspective as one of the initiatives that does not go the direction of recommodification, but of decommodification. Then of course we quickly get to the trap where the decommodified version of food leads to the kind of reactions like the ones that you mentioned, the not for me reaction. This is like for specific people who somehow maybe cannot afford the commodified version or something like that. So I was interested just to hear if you developed strategies to actually move beyond or actually attract the people that have this initial reaction, like this is not for me, because that way, of course, you can actually extend the decommodified version of food beyond the people who are, well, maybe already most familiar with it. So what kind of strategies or methods did you come up with or did you try to reach these people?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because that was definitely a learning process, I would say. At the beginning, we tried to do that very much and very regularly, but for example, by organizing like pop-up markets, like literally just appearing on the Dam Square, for example, and reaching a very broad group of people, and also just walking up to them, like triggering conversation. But we did find that takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and is not very rewarding at all. So that's something that we over time, maybe not even that consciously, but over time started doing less of, because it cost us a lot and didn't really return that much. I think over time we decided to do it in a more organized way. So we would try to get in touch with event organizers, to do caterings, for example, to give talks at schools. So to, in that way, reach a big group of people at once, without having to sort of prove ourselves or prove the worth of the food at every interaction. Like once you're in the door, then you can tell your story, and then you have more of a open discussion, I think.
Okay, thanks. I saw that there was a question from Lucy, and maybe Sophia, could you stop sharing your screen so we can get the overview again of all?
Oh yeah, sorry about
that.
Yeah, good point. Stop share.
But Lucy, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I had a similar question, but then kind of on the other side of the chain. And I was wondering, what kind of reactions do you receive from the places where you pick up the surplus food? Because I mean, like the way I see it, there's a bit of a tension, because on one hand, you're taking something for free that they were trying to make profit from. And at the same time, you kind of like solving a waste problem that they would otherwise have to solve themselves. And I suppose, you know, in the ideal state of things, there wouldn't be any food for you to pick. Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you make sense of this relationship?
Yeah, also a really good question. And I think from the very beginning, we sort of said our main aim would be to make ourselves redundant, so to put ourselves out of work. So I definitely agree with that. In terms of the relationship with the shops, I actually feel like we have very positive relationships, mainly because we work, like the grocery shops that we pick up with are very small businesses. So in the Javastraat, where there's a lot of greengrocers that are mostly Turkish and Moroccan owned. And I really feel like all the shop owners don't want to throw away the food at all. So they're very welcoming for us to do so. And we've been working with the same shop since the very beginning, so since 2012, 13. So in that sense, I think we agree, like they think it's a shame as well, but they also have been adapting ways to try and sell more food, because we notice that even if we pick up there every day, it's still too much for us to redistribute. Like we're only going by bike. So we've also noticed that there have been crates put up to sell for 50 cents, for example, like these small ways of still trying to make use of the food that's left over. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Siska, maybe as a final question before we move on to the general discussion.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was also very nice to hear more about the initiative. I had heard a bit about Taste Before You Waste, but it was nice. I also did some research with a food waste cafe in Groningen some years ago, and what I found that would come up a lot in interviews was that it was partially a food waste cafe, but a lot of the participants participated because of the social cohesion aspect and just meeting other people through the initiative, and really just having the physical space as a place to go to, and maybe also trying to broaden this for a bigger discussion. So I also wonder if that's also changed the makeup of the participants of Taste Before You Waste. If people can't actually go to a cafe for this social aspect, then is there fewer people that are involved in it, or have you noticed any changes by just doing the distribution instead?
Oh, so you mean like now in COVID that we've seen a change in our? Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge change for us. I think like within the organization, obviously there's still communication and some cohesion, but I think like a great part of what we do really we miss, basically, because we were also always a space where everyone could just walk in and find like-minded people, get food for free or for a very low price. And I think I think that's like what I was saying at the beginning, was that we try to imbue the food with the most value possible, like social value, nutritious value, and everything. But I think that we can't do to the extent that we would like to at the moment. Now it's a bit more of a redistribution operation, which is not what we were set up to do. Thanks.
It's great already to see so many questions, to hear so many questions, and also the discussion a bit ago in the chat. It's nice to see that. And what we are going to do now is that we break up in 2 rooms. So we can discuss a few of the elements that we touched upon already more deeply with each other in smaller groups. We can take about, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes. We will split into 2 groups, and I will share 3 questions in the chat that you can use as a starting point for the discussion. They build further on the questions that Peter already showed during the presentation at the beginning. So I think we're now going into breakout rooms. Deirdre is helping us with that, and we're all set, it seems. So you can join the breakout room in a bit, and then we will see each other back in about 20 minutes.